You're standing in front of a mirror, staring at your reflection, and wondering what the point of it all is, and that's when you realize that Albert Camus spent his entire career on one question: if life has no meaning, what do we do on Tuesday morning? You're not alone in this feeling, and Camus' philosophy is all about embracing this absurdity, this gap between humanity's desire for meaning and the apparent indifference of the universe. As you go about your day, you can't help but think about how Camus' concept of the absurd can be applied to your own life, and how it can help you find meaning in a seemingly meaningless world. You think about the myth of Sisyphus, a man condemned to roll a rock up a mountain, only for it to roll back down, requiring him to start all over again, and you wonder how this relates to your own life, with its own set of struggles and challenges. Camus saw Sisyphus as a hero, not because he was able to escape his fate, but because he continued to push the rock up the mountain, despite the futility of his task, and you start to see how this mindset can be applied to your own daily struggles. As you navigate the complexities of your own existence, you begin to understand that Camus' philosophy is not just about accepting the absurd, but about embracing it, and finding ways to create your own meaning in life. You imagine yourself standing on a mountain, feeling the Mediterranean heat beating down on you, and watching as Sisyphus pushes his rock up the mountain, and you start to see the beauty in his futility, the way he finds meaning in the act of pushing, despite the fact that the rock will always roll back down, and you start to think about how you can apply this mindset to your own life. You realize that, just like Sisyphus, you have the power to choose how you respond to the absurdity of life, and that you can find meaning in the simplest of actions, the everyday tasks that make up your daily routine. As you go about your day, you start to see the world in a different light, and you begin to understand that the absurd is not just something to be accepted, but something to be celebrated. As you delve deeper into Camus' philosophy, you start to understand that existentialism is not just a theory, but a way of life, a way of embracing the uncertainty and ambiguity of human existence, and you start to see how this can be applied to your own life, with its own set of uncertainties and ambiguities. You realize that you have the power to create your own meaning, to choose your own path, and to find your own way in the world, and you start to feel a sense of liberation, a sense of freedom that comes from embracing the absurd. You start to see that life is not about finding some grand, universal meaning, but about creating your own meaning, in the moment, and you start to understand that this is a powerful and empowering idea. You think about the concept of living in the present and how it relates to Camus' philosophy, and you start to see how this can be applied to your own life, with its own set of distractions and diversions. You realize that the present moment is all you have, and that it's up to you to make the most of it, to find meaning and purpose in the here and now, and you start to understand that this is a key part of Camus' philosophy. As you go about your day, you start to focus on the present moment, and you start to see the world in a different light, a world that is full of beauty and wonder, but also full of uncertainty and ambiguity. You start to see that Camus' philosophy is not just about individualism, but about living in the world, engaging with others, and finding ways to create meaning and purpose in the midst of uncertainty, and you start to understand that this is a key part of his concept of the absurd. You realize that you are not alone in this feeling, and that others are struggling with the same questions and doubts, and you start to see the importance of community and connection in creating meaning and purpose in life. As you navigate the complexities of human relationships, you start to understand that Camus' philosophy is not just about the individual, but about the individual in relation to others, and you start to see the world as a complex web of relationships and interactions. You think about the concept of acceptance and how it relates to Camus' philosophy, and you start to see how this can be applied to your own life, with its own set of challenges and struggles. You realize that acceptance is not about resignation, but about embracing the reality of the situation, and finding ways to create meaning and purpose in the midst of adversity, and you start to understand that this is a key part of Camus' philosophy. As you go about your day, you start to practice acceptance, and you start to see the world in a different light, a world that is full of beauty and wonder, but also full of uncertainty and ambiguity. You stand there, looking out at the world, feeling the weight of the absurd, and the freedom of choice, and you realize that, as Camus said, one must imagine Sisyphus happy, and in that moment, you understand that the key to living an absurd life is not to find meaning, but to find joy, and that is a truly liberating thought, one that can change your life forever, as you come to understand that the art of saying yes to an absurd life is the art of saying yes to life itself, in all its beauty, complexity, and uncertainty.